Sounds good. Hey everyone, my name's Sam Edwards. I'm here with Blackwire Designs and glad you could join us today. Here with Josh and Rhonda from Island Router. Uh, we're pretty excited to make this happen. A few things over here at Blackwire. We're a specialty distributor. So we're built by technicians for technicians. That means we focus on gear that saves time, systems that are shipped pre-configured and real world support from folks who've actually done the work, right? So if you're not already working with us, now's a great time to jump in, head over to blackwiredesigns.com, get started. It's quick registration, unlocks access to all our tools, training, and product lines that we offer. Now, one of the things we love doing is introducing integrators to smart solutions. And Island Routers is exactly that. Island takes a device centric approach to networking, giving you live visibility into every connected device, grouped by user or function with intuitive control, whether you're local or remote. Uh, Add in enterprise grade security, unmatched performance, and support of thousands of VPN tunnels, and you've got a router that's purpose built for today's networks. So we're excited to have the Island team here, and today they're going to walk you through how this platform is so powerful. Couple quick notes. One, we'll be doing a prize giveaway during the session, so make sure you stick around until the end. Then we'll discuss what the prize is there at the end, but you don't get to know until you see the whole show, right? Everyone who registered will also receive an exclusive discount via email after the webinar. So if you can't stay this whole time, it's no worries. There's a link of the full recording that's going to be emailed to you so you can catch up at your own pace. And if you have any questions during the session, please submit them in chat below and we'll be answering them live as we go. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to the Island team. Josh, run it. It's all yours. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Sam, and good morning, everyone. My name is Josh. I am one of our regional sales directors here at Island. I'm joined today by Rhonda and Lee from our team as well. Rhonda is our senior director of channel success, and Lee wears so many hats I couldn't even give him a title, but he is very, very knowledgeable when it comes to networking, when it comes to Island, and when it comes to the industry. Um, and so today we're going to talk to you a little bit about Island, what it is, and why you should be using it. Bottom line on top. Island is a wired only router, wired by design. And I want to start off by saying we don't do switches, we don't do access points, we don't do any other networking equipment because, and I'm certain you're about to see this for yourself, Island is to every other router out there. I use this comparison often, like iPhone was to BlackBerry and all the phones that came before it, right? We had increasingly, if you remember a couple of decades ago, we had increasingly better phones, but then iPhone came and completely revolutionized the market, and that's what Island is doing as well. And so when we think about how it's different, there's a lot to go into, but we're going to start with who came up with it and why the team behind Island is different. And I before we even dig into that, I should let you know, as part of that being a wired only router, we're very agnostic when it comes to what switches you use, what access points you use, what control systems you use. In fact, we have tons of dealers using various systems, and we say keep using that, just let us be the router. And I'll show you why. When you start digging into our history, it's really important to understand that the network landscape is changing. That what we understand about networking and what networking requirements look like today are different than what they were before. Specifically, when a lot of us got into this industry, I say us as if I've been in this a long time. I'm clearly fairly young, but when a lot of people got into this industry, networks were really not part of it. It was lighting, it was sound, but things weren't reliant on the networks. Versus today, everything's reliant on the network. There's hundreds of IoT devices. There's advanced security threats out there. Wi-Fi is getting faster and faster. How is AI going to impact our networks? We're already starting to see it when it comes to gaming and some other applications. And the routers that we have are just not up to that task. There's just not, they were good, but they're not forward thinking enough. And so that's why we built Island, is we wanted to create something that was really robust and that really made you feel like your network was your own private island, hence the branding. And so when you dig into our team, we've actually been doing this a long time. And oftentimes I get asked, well, why should I trust you? Who are you guys? I know all of these name brands and you guys are brand new. And the truth is, we're not brand new. We've actually been around since the 70s. We were part of a team over at DataPoint, if anyone remembers DataPoint. One of our founders was the guy who wrote ArtNet, which was the first real LAN protocol. We did PowerLAN in the 80s. We were actually acquired. We actually, before even that, we built Instant Internet, if anyone remembers Instant Internet, which was really the first PPPoE gateway and the first VPN router. In fact, it was so popular that we were acquired by Bay Networks. And then when Nortel acquired Bay, we went with them. And that acquisition was largely in part to Instant Internet, which I don't know if anyone remembers back in the day when the internet ran on IP, but most LANs ran on IPX, and getting those two to talk to each other was a headache. Instant Internet was just plug and play. You plug in the LAN, you plug in the WAN, everything just works. And so I want you guys to know that we have this history of taking really tough things and making them easy. And we're a technology shop that is used to building fantastic products and getting acquired and supporting those products and making them eventually potentially part of a larger ecosystem. But really, that's part of why we've decided to make Island very agnostic, is we want to make a product that is good on its own right and then let you choose what to pair with it. And then the last piece of our history is for the last 2.5 decades, the reason you haven't heard from us is because we've been working on the ISP end. In fact, we've been building boxes for ISPs that handle millions of users at hundreds of gigabits per second. And as part of that, we learned how to make things reliable. We learned how to make things very robust. And and we have some of those boxes that haven't even been power cycled in as long as 14 years, as far as I'm aware of. And so around 2019 or so, we started to see the growth of the home network. And suddenly it wasn't just the computer, but it's the speakers, it's the lights, it's the shades, it's everyone has a laptop and an iPhone and an iPad and a Apple Watch. There's the Xbox. There's so many different things on the network, sometimes even the dishwasher. And we started to look, and there wasn't really a great solution out there that could handle it all, that was easy to use, and that also supplied a robust security solution. And then the same thing on the business side, right? What is out there that's really supplying a robust solution? There's some great brands out there, but they're good for right now. They're not really prepped for the future. And if you're a business, you need really a dedicated IT team to manage those types of products. And so that's part of why we came out with Island is we wanted to make things easy. We decided that it was time for networking to no longer be hard and to no longer be something that you needed advanced understanding in order to put together a really strong, robust network. And so when it comes down to it, there's sort of three pillars to Island: performance, security, and simplicity. And the first two, I'll tell you, for us, we see them as just table stakes. We wouldn't even be at the table sitting here talking to you if it weren't for if we didn't have those covered. But I'm going to start with number one, which is performance. When we say hyper efficient source code, what we're talking about in large part, and not exclusively, but in large part, is the packet engine. So I don't know what sort of routers you guys are using right now. There's lots of fantastic brands out there, but they all use the exact same packet engine. It's about 400,000 lines of code. And it's open source. It's not super robust. And instead, what we're using our proprietary packet engine that we developed for the ISPs. It's about 40,000 lines. So think about that. Just 10% as many lines of code to achieve the exact same result. That's the efficiency we're talking about. We have two products, Island and Island Pro, that handle 5,000 or 10,000 devices, 2 million or 14 million packets per second. I'm going to show you what that actually looks like here in a second. But when you think about performance, a lot of times people stop at the ISP, right? They think about, okay, well, I'm paying for 2.5 gigs, but that's not really what matters. Nor is it actually your network performance. That's just your bandwidth, right? Just because you can get a 2.5 gigabit service into your house, does that mean your devices are actually getting 2.5 gigabits of bandwidth? It's like trying to as this analogy shows, it's like trying to push a fire hose through a squirt bottle. And I want to dig into that bandwidth thing for just a second, because we have this really great analogy we like to use about the municipal water system. That 2.5 gigabits, well, when you think about the ISP, they've got all of their lines running throughout your neighborhood. That's like and the water system, that's like the main line running down your street. And then you've got the pipe going to your house, right? In ISP speak, that's the plan you're paying for. That's your 2.5 gigabits per second. But that's really just the diameter of the pipe for going from the main line to your house. That's not what's actually determining your pressure at the faucet. What's determining your pressure at the faucet is your water pump, which in the networking world is your packet engine. And that's one of the places where we really excel. So when you start thinking about, okay, well, yeah, I can run a speed test and show that I'm getting this much, but am I actually able to move that much when we talk about packets that aren't just empty packets? Or am I actually able to get the full bandwidth that I'm paying for? Island is one of the routers out there that can truly provide that in every situation. And how do we measure this? Just so you know, we use this piece of technology. This is a Keysight Perfect Storm. It's a little test bench. It basically allows us to inject packets. And here are some results just for you to see. And by the way, these results are with Island, and they're a year and a half old results. We're actually faster than this right now. But just to give you a comparison, here's brand new. I think you can figure out who they are. I won't actually tell you. But right around 300,000 packets per second, you see them go unstable. We tried to inject 1.4 million. 300,000 is as much as they could do. Here's brand S, very similar. We tried to inject 1.4 million, around 200,000. They didn't actually go unstable. Their whole UI locked up. And then here's Island, not even Island Pro, just Island, doing 1.2 million packets per second. Here, now it does up to 2 million packets per second with every feature enabled. And often I get asked, okay, well, what is packets per second? That's actually the exchange rate. How many pieces of information or bundles of information the router can actually push through the network at any given time. Connection, same thing. Today, when you open a web page, think about like opening weather.com. You know how like the header will load and the body will load, and then all of the ads will load in these different videos. All of those are using different connections. And today's web pages are enormous and they use tons of connections. And so again, here's brand new. We're testing connections now. They can manage about 20,000 connections per second. Brand S right here manages about 15,000 connections per second. Again, these two have the exact same packet engine. And then here's Island doing 140,000 connections per second. And I think since we've done this testing, Island is now up to 200,000 packets per second. So 10 times faster than brand new, or 10 times more connections per second. Uh, and more than that for brand S. And then Island Pro, I think, does 800,000 connections per second, if I'm not mistaken. Perhaps Rhonda or Lee can correct me there if I'm wrong. So when you start thinking about performance, think about what's coming. AI, right? Future security threats, Wi-Fi 7. Are the networks, are the routers that you're installing ready for that? And if you install a router today, is it going to serve your customers well for the next 5 years? Or is it going to need to be replaced in another year? Again, that's pillar one, performance. That's just table stakes. Pillar two, security. So one of the things that we've done differently is basically every other router solution and every other security solution out there. Really, what they do is as new threats emerge, they layer fixes on them, right? And just adding another patch on top of a hole, does it seal the hole? Yeah, but pretty soon you no longer have a wall, you have a bunch of patches, right? And so with Island, instead of doing that, we've tried to take a ground up approach to security. We've implemented modular architecture. So different things are compartmentalized. So even if one thing gets exposed, it doesn't expose everything else. For example, I believe our packet engine is completely separated from everything else in terms of security, in terms of uh, maybe a hostile actor's ability to get in and mess with the router. In fact, our kernel stack is isolated and treated as a separate virtual network. Uh, Not only that, if you had to ask yourself, what's the biggest security threats to your networks? You'd think of a lot of different things. And I've heard integrators talk to me about a lot of different concerns. I would argue that the biggest security threat to any network you install is the users on that network, right? How many of us know someone who has received an email and with a link and they click the link and all of a sudden their data is out there, or there's a virus on their computer, or um, or potentially they're getting emails. How many of us have received an email that looked like it was from an employer or a coworker and it wasn't? Threat filtering, island protection is one thing we offer that, as far as we can see, nobody else has. And what I mean by that is when you think about a firewall, you're thinking about inbound threat protection, right? I'm blocking things from attacking my network, from penetrating my network. But what Island does is not only do we have a robust firewall, it's a stateful firewall. I think we do layer 7 packet inspection, but we tack onto that island protection, which is outbound threat protection, which means when your customer gets an email with a link that they shouldn't click and they don't know not to click it, we're going to prevent them from actually making that connection. We protect against botnets, hacking, spam, malware, a few, I think 8 different categories of real-time threat protection that we're doing on top of the firewall to keep your network safe. Again, security and performance just table stakes. Where we really shine and what makes us so different from every other router on the market is simplicity, is how easy we make it for you and how easy we make it for your end users. In fact, one of your end users could learn how to use Island in 15 minutes. We know because we've made a 15-minute video that teaches them everything they need to know. Um, So when we talk about simplicity, a few different things. Number one, the way that Island visualizes the network. How many of us have sat there and looked at a table full of IP addresses and MAC addresses and tried to go device to device to match everything up? It's a headache. I think we can all agree. And instead, Island visualizes the network as devices, users, and groups. Effectively, what's online, who's online, and what are they doing? It's a very easy, very quick visual approach. Out of curiosity, how many people think back? Have you ever done a router replacement or a network takeover where there's already an existing network with existing infrastructure? Maybe there's some VLANs, maybe there's a couple of DHCP reservations, and you wanted to swap out that router and you didn't with a new router. Most of the time, and I've pulled dozens of integrators at this point, I've heard anywhere from 45 minutes to 2 days is how long that takes to make sure everything's up and running. Just to give you an example, and we'll cover it a little bit more later, Island has this smart swap feature that takes that entire process down to about 5 minutes. And just one example of how we're making things easier for you. So, what problems is Island solving? Right? Well, yeah, we need performance, but why do we need performance? Most of us has probably looked at our network usage at some point or another. I can tell you when I'm using my PC, I'm only using about 13 megabits per second on average. But then what happens when we start having multiple users on the network? What happens when we start needing to do large file transfers? How many cameras are you installing? And do you need a router that can support large amounts of bandwidth to get all of those cameras feeds back to the MDR? Right? What sort of voice over IP applications are you doing? How many devices do you have on the network? Maybe you're using great access points, but you have a crappy router behind it. And so just because you have really fast Wi-Fi connections between your wireless devices and the network, your actual internet is slow on wireless devices because the Wi-Fi is only as good as the router behind it, right? How many of us are using VPN? And if not, why aren't we? VPN is super important, super useful, but how many of us are avoiding it just because it's a headache to configure? That's part of what Island is solving, is making things easy, making things fast, and making things reliable, and making things secure. So before we go further, just a quick rundown on our 2 different models, and these prices that you see here are MSRP. And as Sam mentioned, you guys get them through Blackwire. There is some Blackwire has its own pricing for you guys, and for attending this, there's some sort of discounting You'll have to go over that with Sam. But when it comes to Island models, we've got two of them. We've got Island and Island Pro. Now, Island was our first product out. We did about I think a 18-month beta test over 100 different sites. It came out in March or April of 2023. It's been very popular, does 2 million packets per second, 130,000 connections per second. But there were a few things that the market pushed back and said we're missing a couple things. Number one, Island has 4 single gigabit ports, and we started to hear from a lot of the space that multi-gig was necessary. The form factor is a little bit jarring to some people. It's not your typical rack mount. It's designed to look elegant. It's designed to look sleek, and it's designed for smaller installations or for those installations where they don't have a rack. They want to leave their networking equipment either like on a shelf or wherever they may leave it. So the form factor was another piece that the market pushed back on us with, and so a few months back we released Island Pro, which primarily represents a hardware upgrade. Software wise, they are very, very similar. And in fact, you use the same app with the same interface for the two of them. But Island Pro does 14 million packets per second, 800,000 connections per second. It's got the 6 2.5 gig ports and the 4 SFP plus ports, which have all been tested at 1, 2.5, 5, and 10 gigabits per second. That all being said, these are both fantastic, way ahead of their time products. Just to remember for a second, every other router out there is using the same packet engine, choking around 300,000 packets per second. Island does 2 million. Island Pro does 14 million. So even with Island, we're already talking like a massive, massive jump, almost a 10 times jump in speed, or at least in performance. Both these products offer multi-WAN. In fact, all of the ports are agnostic, and we'll get into that in a second. They both offer VPNs. They both offer VLANs. We don't do any sort of subscription fees. They all come with baked-in margins for you, and all of our support is US based. So, and let's talk about that for just 1 second. If you're out and on an install with an Island and you don't know what's going on, you're running into trouble, your first call is to potentially either your distributor or one of your Island salespeople, like myself. If I don't know the answer, we're going to Lee. And if Lee doesn't know the answer, we even get our CTO on the line with you in real time while you're on site to troubleshoot with you. And I'll show you what some of the features we've implemented in that to help with that in just a few moments. But we've won several awards, including with Channel Pro, just because it's such a robust product. Again, remember back to, I think it was 2005, 2006 that the iPhone came out, and it completely changed the market and it changed how we understand and interact with our phones. That's what Island's doing with networking. It's changing how we understand and interact with our home networks. And especially for your end users, those of you who like to share some agency over the network with their end users, this is a game changer. So that's Smart Swap, just to give you an idea of what that looks like. Usually, if you're going to go and install a router on an existing network, maybe there's some control systems. Usually, walk in, they have their modem, their router, their switch going to everything else, and you sort of have to print out a list of IP addresses and MAC addresses and match each one up and make sure everything is, learn all the VLANs, make sure every device is identified correctly. With Island, that becomes easy. Effectively, you walk in, you plug Island into Powder, and then you plug Island into the switch. And this is a little bit of a strange approach for a lot of integrators, because typically when you install a router, you set up the WAN and then you set up the LAN. This time, instead, with the Smart Swap, when you plug Island into the switch, you're actually plugging into the port that will become the LAN port on Island. And then you just wait a couple minutes, use the bathroom, grab a beer, whatever you need to do. Hopefully you're not grabbing beers on your installs unless your end users are super cool. But Island, in about 2 minutes or less, Island will go out and learn all of the network, every device by its IP address, by its MAC address. It'll do some fingerprinting to try and determine the manufacturer, the operating system, help you identify what type of device it is. And after about 2 minutes, what you do is you disconnect the existing router from the switch. And at that point, Island says, hey, nobody else is hosting a DHCP server. I already have the DHCP table. Let me start hosting that server. And let me, whatever that old router's IP address is, I'm going to assign that to myself. So now all of those other devices on the network don't even have to be power cycled. They can just keep communicating with the same router at the same IP address. And now it's going to me instead of that other router. And then your last step is simply move the WAN over. Just unplug it right here and plug it in right here. That's it. That's your smart swap. Island even will have learned the VLANs. The only two things it doesn't carry are port forwards and DHCP reservations, but that's two swipes and a tap to reset up an Island. It's very, very quick. And I've had integrators call me after their first smart swap, and they've said, Josh, look, this would have taken me. This took me 15 minutes because it was my first time doing it. Next time I expected to take me 5. It would have taken me 4 hours with the routers I used to use. So when you start thinking about, okay, what is best for my business? Not only do you want robust products, not only do you want reliable products, but you also want products that are going to save you time on actually time on site, on fewer truck rolls, and on time training your installers. That's what Island is offering. We've got a whole robust training, and I'll show you real quick. Like I can click right here. This is what our training site looks like here on support.islandrouter.com. We've got a whole bunch of videos that you can look through. These are all broken into bite-sized chunks, 3 to 4 minutes, about various different aspects of Island. So just filtering, for example, creating custom filters, scheduling events, and we'll get all into that in just a moment. I can find there we go. And I'm gonna jump through here just a little bit. But let's go into the Island app for a second. But before I do, I want to show you, take you on a full tour of what the interface looks like. Before I do, does anyone have any questions? You should be able to post them in chat. I believe there's a Q&A ability. Seeing none, I'm going to continue. So just to show you, by the way, I'm using our web interface right now, which is accessible locally, as long as you're on the same network as the Island at my.islandrouter.com. It looks identical to our app interface. And then we also have a very robust CLI. The tongue-in-cheek answer is if you're familiar with Cisco CLI, then you already know our CLI because it's largely the same. So those of you who like to get in through the CLI, that is also an option. But here's our web interface. So you can set this up either on your phone or you can set this up on your on your laptop. Kevin's asking, are there any Pi-hole features to block ads? Yes, absolutely. In fact, Kevin, I have used Pi-hole myself, and I will tell you, I no longer use Pi-hole because I have Island. And we're going to get into that exactly. So here's our home screen. Right off the bat, you see the Island logo, which means the internet connection's good. This would be replaced by a yellow or a orange exclamation point indicating that the connection was degraded or that there was no connection. So when you think about, okay, my end user has just called me, they say the internet's out, I'm going to have to roll a truck out there to go and figure out what's going on because I can tell on my end that I can't see their network, but I don't even know if it's my equipment that's down or if it's just the ISP is down. This is an easy answer. Tell your customer to open the Island app or just go to my.islandrouter.com. Do you see the Island logo there? Oh, then it's not the ISP. Something's wrong on your network. Do you see a big red exclamation point? Then Island doesn't see the internet. Just like that. In that case, I actually just lost connection to my Island. Give it just one sec. You'll notice up here, I'm already doing a port forward on 443, which is Island's default port. So Island knows to back up to 4443, which is why I have this additional 4443 here. All right, so back on the home screen, you also see right here, this is not a speed test. This is a second-by-second snapshot of the actual network traffic across my router. Right, so currently I'm only using 5 megabits per second. It's not saying that that's my max internet speed. And the reason you see this is because I have my island in what's called geek mode, right? And I'll turn that off. You see that disappear. Geek mode is our answer to, okay, how much agency should we give our end users? If you decide to share your agency over the network with your end user, all of our end user oriented marketing materials point out geek mode and say essentially, hey, geek mode lets you access more advanced features. Call your integrator before we recommend you call your integrator before you enable it. And most of our really smart integrators, what they do is if they do choose to share agency of the network, they just show the geek mode switch to their end users and say, keep this turned off. You won't mess up anything. And then they create a backup of the configuration as soon as they're done with the install. And so they never have to worry. Even if the end user messes with something, they can restore to the backup. I'm going to leave geek mode on for right now, but I'm going to show you a couple spots where I'll turn it off just to show you the difference. We also have help mode. Help mode just annotates everything on screen. Personally, I think it's a little bit cluttering, so I'm going to leave it off, but it's good for first-time island users. Scrolling down just a little bit, you see devices, users, and groups. That's what I was talking about earlier. What's online, who's online, what are they doing? Devices, you can see that I have 24 of 74 devices online, and 3 of them are new, meaning that I haven't identified them to my island. 1 of 4 users online, 6 of 7 groups online. And then you can see I have island protection, I've got some events, and I've got some VPNs. We'll dig into that here in just a second. One thing to note is that this entire interface is hosted on the island itself. So there's no cloud dependency. And by default, remote access is disabled on island. Now, those of you who are using something like Oversee or Unify or Domos or any other sort of cloud management platform, if you put their device on the network behind the island, whether it's, for example, the Oversee Pro Hub or the Unify Cloud Key, whatever, um, one of those devices that hosts effectively a proxy server on the network, even with Island's remote access turned off, you can always access this interface remotely through your cloud management platform. That being said, you can also access it remotely through the app, through the Island app, as long as you enable remote access, and I'll show you how to do that in a second. The reason I mention it now is you're about to see Island collects a lot of information for your end users, but we don't do anything cloud-based because we want to protect that information and make sure it stays secure. So with that, let's jump down to devices. And here you can see on the device screen, and by the way, this sidebar in the app is just at the bottom. That's one of the only visual differences. And in fact, if I rescaled this window to look like a phone window, you'd see it move to the bottom. But here on the devices screen, we can see a snapshot of all traffic across the network. So here under active now are my most active devices, the devices using the most bandwidth. And by the way, this is my home network. I can see I have 74 devices, 3 new, 24 online. Let me click on the device list right here. And now we can scroll through my devices and you can see by name, by IP address, by MAC address. In fact, I can sort, for example, by when it was first seen, or maybe what's the MAC address, and Island highlights that, so it makes it very easy for me to see. See, there's my pie hole right there. Just to give you an idea, this is what your end users would see if they weren't running Geek Mode. A much simpler, much easier interface. And let's jump into one of my devices. We're going to jump into Josh Work, which is the laptop I'm chatting with y'all on now, and I'm going to turn Geek Mode back on. Here on this one device screen, we can see I have it assigned to myself as a user and to my productivity group. But we'll talk about users and groups in just a moment. I've got some filters as well. I have one umbrella inherited from all devices, and I also have my work focus filter. And the practical effect of that is if the work focus filter is I'm actually blocking most social media. So for example, if I go to facebook.com, it won't actually load. And you'll see here in the live view, this little orange dot pops up and we'll move across. This is the same from the last screen, a 10-minute snapshot. You'll actually see that orange dot is saying that something got blocked. And if we look down here, you can see 2 connections blocked to social. And if we drill in, it's social networking. And it was Facebook that got blocked. So I can see exactly what got blocked. Simultaneously, I can see where has this device been going, either by category, subcategory, or all the way down to the individual host names that this device has been accessing and how many connections it's been making to each one of those hosts. Here in the week view, this is the device's activity. Obviously, I wasn't very active last week. I was actually traveling, aside from Wednesday when I VPN back home. But I can sort this history by day and see exactly which day, where was I going, and when was this device active. With one tap, I can pause all network traffic to this device, effectively cutting it off the internet. I can assign VPNs that I have configured on my island specifically to this device. So let's say you do a site-to-site VPN between your office and every single one of your client sites. When you need to VPN to their site, you can go into your office island, enable the VPN for your laptop to that client site, and then your laptop alone will be able to VPN over to the client site, and nothing else on your network will. It's very easy, just a simple flip of a switch. Simultaneously, if you set up a VPN, maybe your customers have a company VPN that they need to set up. You can set that up on the island and then enable it just for their device. So not everyone has access to the VPN, just that user or just that particular device or just that group. You can even schedule that. So for example, if I go to events, you can see I have my VPN scheduled from 8:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m., Monday through Friday. Which means 8:30 a.m. Monday morning, my laptop, as long as it's connected to my home network, it suddenly is on our company VPN and stays on the company VPN until 5:30 p.m. It's very easy to do. And scheduling events is designed with to be simple for people who have not necessarily had a whole bunch of network experience. It's very simple. What kind of event? Do I want to pause network traffic? Do I want to add additional filtering, or do I want to add a VPN? Right? When do I want the event to start and end? How often do I want it to repeat? Maybe I want it to repeat certain days of the week. Do I want to be notified before it starts and before it ends? That's it. Very, very easy. And once you've already created an event, like for example, we see a lot of end users creating events that are maybe bedtime filters for their kids, or not necessarily filters, bedtime, like 9 p.m. rolls around and all of their devices are paused. And then spring break hits and they don't want their kids to have to go to bed early. You can go back into an existing event and you can create an adjustment, whether you skip it or extend when it ends, or you can suspend it temporarily. John, do we have the ability to block by country? Yes, and I will show you that. That goes into custom filters. For example, this work focus filter I have applied here, I'm going to show you what the custom filters do in a second. But it's worth mentioning while we're talking about filters that Island uses these umbrellas for filters. So if I'm looking at just this device, by default, everything on the network has one umbrella. That's the island protection I was talking about earlier. That's the on top of the firewall. That's outbound threat protection. We also have 2 umbrellas and 3 umbrellas. By default, 2 umbrellas is going to block pornography, and 3 umbrellas is going to block everything in this mature content category. Right? And so I can say for just this device, I want it to block, I want to have 3 umbrellas on it. Or maybe most devices I only have on 1 umbrella, but the kids' devices I have on 2 or 3 umbrellas. You can also enable safe search and safe video search specifically by device if you want to. Scrolling down here, you can see some more details about the device, including when it was first seen, what its IP address was. You can put the device in incognito mode, meaning that Island won't necessarily log all of this data. And in incognito mode, you still have the ability to show if anything was blocked. So in incognito mode, excuse me, you have the ability you can still apply filters to devices. Island will still prevent those devices from going places that you've set rules to prevent them from going to, but it won't log that it tried to go there unless you choose incognito and show blocks, in which case it'll still also show things that were blocked, but not necessarily things that weren't. Here's also where you can add a DHCP reservation for this particular device. Just to give you an idea, when you do a smart swap, Island will already have the right IP address in. So if this device needed a DHCP reservation, it already has the same IP address it had with the previous router. All I have to do is hit save. It's that easy to recreate the DHCP addresses. Port forward, same thing. Here's where I can add a port forward for this particular device. We can enable UPnP by device. And then these two features right here are really cool. Number one is preferred internet. So for anyone who's doing dual WAN, not only can you set up a network-wide prioritization scheme, where you can say, okay, this is my primary WAN, and then I want to do load balancing, or I want to do this is my backup. I fail over to this other one. Maybe you have 3 or 4 WANs and you have some sort of prioritization. Not only can you do that with Island, but then you can also specify by device which one you want to prefer. So a great easy use case for this is where Island, our team is based in San Antonio, which has a couple of different ISPs, including Spectrum and AT&T. Typically, customers like AT&T for the cable service, but they like Spectrum's internet plans better. And so what ends up happening is oftentimes we see customers with both Spectrum and AT&T, and Spectrum's their primary and AT&T is their backup. The only issue with that is that their AT&T box it was only able to communicate and get cable TV if it's using the AT&T internet service. So here's a situation where for the whole network, you can set Spectrum to be the primary and AT&T to be the backup. But then if you go to that AT&T cable box, you can say, well, this particular device, we want it to prefer the AT&T internet. Another great use case for that one is, well, let's think about people who work from home and have kids, right? Maybe they have dual WAN because they need to be online 24/7, but they don't necessarily want to share their bandwidth with the kids gaming. Let's set the Xbox to use the backup internet as its preferred internet, just so that while we're working from home, we don't have to share bandwidth. How does Safe Search deal with private MAC on cell phones? Great question. Number one, a couple of different things, and I'll show you. Number one, this device is a great example is because I have it aliased, meaning I've actually identified 4 different MAC addresses as all being this device. Meaning if your customers identify their kids' devices without private MAC turned on, and their kids' devices again with private MAC turned on, then Island will know it's the same device either way. However, we have some other tricks, and I'm going to get to them in a couple minutes that'll help you out with that as well. But yes, we do have tools for dealing with private MAC. This last thing on the device screen, authorized networks. Out of curiosity, and I know that y'all can't talk right back to me, but think about it. How many of you are setting up VLANs? And how many of you are thinking, man, I should be setting up VLANs, but they're complicated and I don't know how, or I just don't like dealing with it? Authorized networks, in addition, is something that we've implemented that makes things very easy to create network segregation, as well as allowing you to utilize Island to its fullest capability. I mentioned earlier that all of the ports on Island are isolated from one another, and they're all routed ports. So there's a couple of things that come into play with that. For example, them all being routed means that I can have 2 different IP schemes on 2 different ports. It also means that if I plug my computer into port 1 and my printer into a switch plugged into port 2, those 2 aren't going to be able to talk to one another. And that stands to be an issue. So let's go to a different device so I can show you. Here's the device we were just on. This device is on most of my network, main net. It's on port 4. My printer is also off of port 4 on my island, but my gaming PC is over here on port 3, which becomes an issue because then I can't print from my gaming PC. So what I've done is in authorized networks, I've actually authorized my gaming PC to go out and find things on port 4. So by enabling this switch, now my gaming PC can go out and communicate with everything on port 4, and that stuff can communicate back as long as my PC initiates the communication. Meaning that instead of even necessarily having to set up a VLAN for my gaming PC, I just have a completely separate LAN, but I'm still able to do cross-LAN communication enabled by a device or on a per device basis. In fact, these down here, these are all VLANs that I have set up, and the same applies. I've allowed my gaming PC to then access not only my main network, but also 3 of my VLANs. Any questions on the controls for any particular device? Single device controls. And back here on the full devices screen, again, this is just an overview. It shows me my most used devices currently. It shows you my network traffic over the past 24 hours. Of course, I can hide a couple of the maybe the most traffic devices so I can see where the other devices are looking like. Okay, seeing no more questions, let's move on to users and groups. And we're going to cover users and groups fairly quickly because they're effectively very similar. The primary difference is you can add multiple users to a group, but you can't add groups to a user. Users and groups are just ways of managing multiple devices. So now if I click on my user, Josh, you see that it's all of these devices that I have checked off here that I'm now controlling, right? And so this is my traffic across all of my devices that I've assigned to myself. And I can see snapshot breakdown which devices are using the most bandwidth. Obviously, the gaming PC uses the most. I've got 3 streams just running downstairs that are just watching other people's streams to give them an extra viewer. So it's constantly using a ton of bandwidth. Again, live view for my entire user. I can see where devices have been going now for my entire user. And then when I drill down, I can see exactly by device, exactly where it's been going. Now I can set filters for the entire user. I can pause the entire user. So if I hit pause right here, all of my devices, every device in the house assigned to me will be cut off. I can schedule an event for the whole user. And so typically what we see happening is we see a user for each person in the household, and maybe we see events that are set to like bedtime events for maybe the 9-year-olds is at 8 p.m. and 14-year-olds is at 12 or whatever it may be. And then we see a group called kids in the household where they've taken both those users and assigned them to the group called kids. And we have some users who have gotten very creative. For example, I know of one who's effectively scheduled an event where from 4 to 7 p.m., the only website their kids' devices can access is their school website. So they can look up what problems in their textbook they need to do their homework. Uh, Again, you can still do preferred internet, authorized networks, or incognito mode by user. And just to show you, here is my fiance. She's in incognito mode. So you still see her network usage, but you don't see at all where she was going. Now, since I have her set to show blocks, you can still see if she had accessed anything or attempted to access anything she wasn't allowed to access, it would still show that here. But it doesn't actually show her network traffic, the places that she's actually been going. Typically, we see adults in the household in incognito mode, kids not so much. The adults say they need it for Christmas shopping. I don't believe any of them, except for one. I believe one of them. Groups and users, again, are very similar. What I like about groups is I have my groups organized by type of network traffic. And there's no right and wrong way to do groups. You could totally have groups of users. You could totally have types of devices. You could have both, right? It's entirely up to you. But what I like about this is I can see, okay, where has all of my bandwidth been going? What types of devices? Obviously, my media devices use a lot overnight. My network devices don't use all that much. My IoT devices don't use all that much, but that's a good thing because here's where I spend my money, my gaming network. I have a really nice gaming setup, which means that I don't have much left over for this IoT stuff, which is basically malware in a box I buy on Amazon, and I'm waiting for someone to try and hack me. Instead, if I come up to this flag here, you've probably seen this flag on every screen, and I'm certain one of you has been wondering, what does that do? Well, that is notifications. If I come up to this flag here, I have a notification set where Island will actually send me a push notification if this group exceeds a certain amount of bandwidth in a given day. And then I can come in and see, okay, well, what device is using most of the bandwidth? If it's my kitchen display, that's basically a Google Home with a screen that we like to watch TV on while we're cooking. I'm not too worried. If it's a smart plug or a light switch or something whose name I can't pronounce, then I'm worried. And Island will show me right here what's using the bandwidth, and then I can go to that device and cut it off the network. So it's a built-in IoT security, like advanced notification, advanced warning system, is effectively what I've created with my island. But with notifications, you can set things to no flag, meaning that island isn't going to log anything. Green flag, meaning island will log it, but not send out a push notification, or orange flag, where it'll actually, or red flag, I think, where it'll actually send out a push notification. But here you can see that these things are logged, but I didn't actually get a push notification for them. This notifications menu is hierarchical. So here I'm accessing it from the IoT screen. So I'm setting up notifications for my IoT group. If I were to come back to devices and select this gaming PC, now I'm setting up notifications for my gaming PC specifically. And in fact, you'll actually see the types of notifications I can set up change a little bit. Versus if I go back to just an overview of the whole network, now I'm setting up notifications for the whole network, and I have more notification types available to me. If I go to the home screen, you have even more actually. So I can be notified like with certain VPNs, for example. So that's users and groups. So again, bottom line on top, the thing to remember is devices or anything connected to the network. Users and groups are who's online and maybe what are they doing? What are those devices doing? Very easy ways to manage multiple devices. And that takes us down to security, which is where we start to get into some of your questions. So at the security tab, you can see all devices on the network where they've been going and simply new devices. New devices being devices that you haven't gone into the island interface to name, save, assign to a device, assign to a user or group. They're just brand new. And for example, in fact, let me show you what a new device looks like. If I click here and I click on new, I have this Ubuntu server. This is my attempt at launching a virtual machine last week, right? And right now it has a name that it picked up by fingerprinting the device, but I haven't saved it. Now, if I hit save, it's no longer a new device. Now, I don't actually have that up and running anymore, so I'm going to remove it because it doesn't exist on my network anymore. But going back to security, you can see I can assign umbrella levels to all devices on the network, and I can apply safe search or any sort of custom filter to all devices, or I can apply them to just new devices. And if we go into new devices here, this goes to one of your questions, which is pause private MACs. How do we can deal with private MAC? The best answer is, for example, on iPhone, when you go into your Wi-Fi settings and change from a private MAC to either a rotating or a fixed or no private MAC address, that's changing it just for that network. So what we really recommend, the best practice, is to go into your iPhone when you're on your home network and turn off private MAC address. However, sometimes kids are smart and they turn them back on because they want to get around parental controls. Here's the solution. We can actually detect if it's a spoof MAC address. And right here, you can pause private MACs for brand new devices on the network, and effectively saying to your kids, well, the rules apply when you're using the right MAC address, and you get no internet whatsoever if you're using the wrong MAC address. Because we won't allow them to make any sort of connections. Right up here is where you can see more of what the umbrella filters do. Right, one umbrella is blocking island protection. Two umbrellas blocks pornography, and three umbrellas blocks everything in this mature content category. Now, here's where you can edit them, right? I could remove alcohol and tobacco and cheating from three umbrellas. However, I couldn't remove the adult and pornography from three umbrellas because it's already blocked under two umbrellas, right? If I unblock it under two, then I have the option about what to do under three. But the umbrellas are hierarchical. So if something is blocked on two umbrellas, it must also be blocked on three umbrellas. That all being said, on this screen, we're actually adjusting what the umbrellas do for the whole network, which is not necessarily what we want to do. Sometimes we might want to create custom filters. For example, my work filter, or for example, as John asked, the ability to block by country. So let's go over here to custom filters. And if we create a custom filter, we can choose country. And we can choose a country or any number of countries that we want to block. We hit next, we give the filter a name, and then we can apply it by group, by user, by device, or we can just save the filter and then schedule it later on. Now, I'm not actually going to save this one. Instead of country, oftentimes you might want to do category, which I'm going to pull up my work focus filter for you, the one that blocked that Facebook link. Here I blocked dating, online greeting cards, and social networking. Now, immediately, alarm bells should be going off in your heads as business people. Oh, Josh, if you block social networking, how are you on Zoom? What do you do for LinkedIn? Well, if I come over here to host names, you can see that I've allowed specifically LinkedIn and Zoom. So if I try to come up here to LinkedIn, it loads no problem. But Facebook, I'll load a little bit slowly. But Facebook, I'm a long way from my access point. Will not load. And if we go back to that device on Island, I'm not going to save the filter. You can see again, Facebook got blocked, but LinkedIn was allowed through. I'm going to pause here for a second and see if anyone has any additional questions on security. Just to show you, custom filter, when we create by category, now you can choose to allow or block any of these specific subcategories for this custom filter, allow or block any specific host names, and then you hit next, you give it a name, and then you can apply it by device, by user, by group, or just save it and schedule it later as I've done. All right, seeing no more questions, let's come up here to the what we call the hamburger menu, which is these three lines at the top left. We're going to go to the network screen. And now you can really see kind of an idea of what my network looks like. Here I've got two WANs, my primary on port 1 and my backup on port 2. I've got my gaming LAN on port 3. And then I've got the rest of my network on port 4, as well as 6 VLANs underneath it. I'm actually very proud of how I've configured this because I've got my VLAN IDs match my numbering scheme. As for why I'm running all /16s, I don't have a good reason. I have a good reason for one of them. I don't have a good reason for the rest of them. Just uniformity. But here you can drill in. Now, every port on Island is individually routed. So you'll see that each of these ports has its own IP address. And you see I have them in specific modes. I have these two in WAN mode and these two in LAN mode. Now, by default, when you first set up your island, everything will be in what's called fully automatic, right? Which means that Island will detect whether it's LAN or WAN and treat it as such. We do recommend, once you've got everything up and running, that you specify the mode. Now, those of you who, and there are a few reasons for that, most of which we've actually solved, especially with our upcoming next release. But generally, it's better to specify the mode just in case someone comes in after you've installed the network and got it all up and running. Someone comes in, your customer's kid's friend comes over and brings their own router and plugs it into the network. You don't want Island to think, oh, there's another router. I no longer need to host a DHCP server. And if you set the port to LAN, not an issue. For dual WAN, you can set a priority level right here. If you set them both to priority 1, then that's a load balancing, like a 50-50 split, versus I have it as priority 1 for my primary and priority 2 for my backup. And so Island knows if the fast wire goes down, then use the T-Mobile. And you could have, theoretically, with an Island Pro with 10 ports, you could have up to 9 WANs, and you could organize them in terms of priority 1 through 4, however you want it to. Good luck finding a location that actually offers 9 different WANs. On the LAN side, you can see how many devices are online for each LAN, and you can manually configure each port. We recommend using the auto configuration. Scrolling down, DNS settings, DDNS settings. Island does our own DDNS service. By default, we add the .myisland.info to the end of it. But DDNS server wise, first come, first serve on your DDNS name. So I'm Josh, this is my island, so my DDNS is joshisland.myisland.info. I can always get back to my network, find my network that way. You can also see and add DHCP reservations and port forwards here, or UPnP. Although this is an option, I recommend that you do it from the device screen. And the reason is, if I go to the device screen and add it, it's simply a matter of clicking the HTTP reservation. But if I'm here, I then have this long list of devices to scroll through. So it's much easier, in my opinion, to just go back to devices, click on the device, and then scroll down and add a DHCP reservation right there. That being said, up here on the network screen, this is a great spot to see, okay, what are my DHCP reservations? Am I missing one? Do I have one extra? Is one of them off? Same thing with port forwards. Moving down to VPNs, right here, if we create a VPN, we have two options. We have standard, which is client to site. So this would be you're connecting your laptop back to your customer's network, or maybe your customer travels a lot and they want their Netflix to stop kicking them out, so they want to VPN their laptop in. By default, you're on the standard and automatic. It's as simple as saying, typing in a VPN name, we'll call it test VPN, and hitting create and share. And then I've actually downloaded a config file that I then upload into my WireGuard client. So WireGuard is a separate software. WireGuard is the VPN protocol. It's the newest, fastest one on the market. And then I'd simply hit add tunnel and put in that WireGuard config file. Whoops. If I'm actually going to delete that VPN because I'm not going to use it. Let's say I wanted to create a site-to-site VPN between two different islands. Maybe your customers have a vacation home and a primary residence, or maybe your office is running off of an island and uh, you want to make sure that you have the VPN from your office to each of your client sites. Hit create, and then instead choose Island Express. And I didn't show you where before, but there's on the VPN screen, you can create a secret for your island. So then you simply put in the secret of the other island and its DNS address. So for me, I would put in my secret and then joshisland.islandrouter.com, or sorry, .islandrouter.info, and then hit create. And that's it. I have a VPN between the two. And then I can go in and I can enable it, disable it entirely, or apply it to specific devices, users, or groups. Any questions about VPN? Seeing none. Oh, and by the way, Kevin, I didn't specifically answer your question, so I'm going to go back. One of our custom filter categories, in addition to safe search, is ad blocking. So we do have ad blocking just like Pi-hole. By the way, we use a company called Webroot to get all of these categories and maintain all of these categories. I don't know if any of you know Webroot, but what they do is they classify the entire internet. Basically, if there's a link, they probably know what type of link it is, and we get their lists and we cache them on the island. In fact, we push out updates to those lists in the background, sometimes multiple times an hour. So typically, any other group that uses Webroot, typically, they type in a web address on their computer, it goes to the router goes to a DNS server, the DNS server resolves it and sends it back to the router, the IP address. Then the router sends it to Webroot. Webroot comes back and says, this is what category it's in. The router checks its own rules and then decides whether to send it or not, which is a lot of extra latency, that extra trip to Webroot and back. Instead, since we're caching those lists on the island, that extra check happens at wire speed. It's happening locally, and we can do it in real time. Continuing down the hamburger menu, Tours is the one thing that does not work really in the web app. Tours is how you would manage multiple islands simultaneously. And so any island, if you were in the phone app, any island that you've installed, you would see a list of it here, and then you could simply click it or tap it to start managing a separate island, to simply hop between islands. Down here in views, this is more theme. Turn on and off geek mode. What theme do we want to be using? But then here in the about section, this is very important. Number one, I mentioned early on that by default, remote access is turned off. I think at this point, you probably see why it's turned off by default. Island is collecting a whole bunch of information. We're storing it locally. We don't put it in the cloud, and we don't necessarily want someone to be able to remote in and get to it unless you specifically allow that. Now, in the CI channel, we do recommend dealers turn on remote access just so that you can make sure you can get back to that island without having to roll a truck. Scrolling down a little bit further, this is another thing I want to touch on, which is allow support. I mentioned earlier that our support is all US based, that if you run into trouble during an island install, one of your first calls should be to your island salesperson. So that would be me for the central and the east, and it would be George Daggett, who's not with us right now, but we'll make sure you have his contact info. George for the west. If we don't know the answer, we're going to get someone like Lee on the line, and we're going to have you turn on this allow support. And effectively, as long as that is turned on, and you've given us the serial number, our team can get in and see what's going on your network in real time on the phone with you. So those of you who have ever had to spend 2, 3 hours on hold with tech support, or who have had to leave a job site half finished because, well, you put in an email request and they haven't gotten back to you. Now it's the end of the day, and then they got back to you at like 7 p.m. and then you emailed them back and you haven't heard back yet. Those days are over. Who has time for that? We don't have time for that. You don't have time for that. Let's get on the phone. Let's get into your network. Let's figure out the problem and solve the problem for you in real time so that you can go to the next install. That's our culture. That's who we are, is let's get, we make tough things easy. And then the last thing to cover in the island interface right here is on upkeep. Um, we do have auto cleanup. I don't want to touch into that very heavily at the moment, but I do want to mention that we have auto updates turned on by default. By default, it'll check for an update at 3 a.m. Every day of the week, but you can either disable auto updates or schedule them, decide when to schedule them. So for example, we have one of our customers is a church, and they have their auto update still turned on, but set to only auto update Monday morning at 3 a.m. So on the off chance that one of our updates messes with everything else they've got going on, they've got a week to fix it before they have to host services again. And then of course you can back up your entire island configuration, and then you can restore the island from the backup. So what we recommend really smart integrators to do is simply every time you finish installing an island network, create a backup file, save it. And then if your customer ever, or if something ever goes wrong, you can very quickly restore the island to that backup file without even having to roll a truck. You can do that remotely as long as remote access is enabled. That is the quick and dirty. So now I'd like to open up to questions unless Lee or Rhonda have more that they'd like to add. So just to recap, in terms of performance, Island is 4 to 10 times faster than pretty much everything else out there. Island Pro is about 7 times faster than Island. In terms of security, not only are we avoiding that sort of fix on top of fix on top of fix, this quilt of patches. Instead, we've implemented modular security features from the ground up. And then in terms of simplicity, whether it's on the install, whether it's on the usage, we've worked to make it as easy for you, and if you choose to share, as easy for your end users as possible.
That's a wrap. I appreciate the Island team hosting that. Very informative. And as far as the prize giveaway, we'll be reaching out. We'll be contacting everybody who participated here today after this is over. And again, it's been recorded, so you can have access to that. But if there's no more questions and we've covered it all, I believe we're done. I really appreciate that. Thank you.